What's going on, guys? It's Chase with Semi-Pro's Garage, and we're bringing you another video today, and the topic is going to be the rock solid motorsports tube front end kit for your 4th gen F-body car. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this kit. I touched on it a little bit whenever we did the intro video to the car. You guys got to see the tube front end kit, and I'll just show you a little piece of it now. I want to take a deeper dive into the step-by-step of installing this tube front end kit on your car. What I will say before we get in depth on it is that there's 2 ways that you can do this. So number 1 being, if you already have a turbo kit on the car and you want to keep that same kit and have your piping, your radiator, your turbo, and everything be in the same placement, which is how it was when we did our tube front end kit, it gets a little bit more complicated because you have to measure everything. Because all of the existing supports and everything that you have on the car from the factory, all that's going to be gone. So you have to measure, from the front of your shock tower to, the back of your headlights. You want to measure from, you can measure from your crank damper to how far away that is to your radiator. There's a lot of different things you guys need to measure to make sure that you get everything back in the same spot that it was in before you cut the front end off of the car. The second way that you can do it is if you do the tube front end kit, which looking back on it, I probably would have done it this way. You can do your tube front end kit and set everything up and then have a custom kit made, which is what we have on the car now. Have the custom kit made around your tube front end and make everything fit. And you can either have it all fit under your, if you plan on running a factory front end on your car or an aftermarket, it doesn't really matter. We actually can fit our entire kit and everything, radiator, intercooler, everything under the factory fenders and bumper. So whenever I don't have the front end on the car, it looks ridiculous and crazy. Like there's no way that it'll fit back under the factory stuff, but it does. The only thing that we would have had to modify would have been the hood, which I wanted to do, a cowl or carbon fiber hood or something on it anyway. And we're going to end up doing, a 2-piece or 1-piece front end on the car regardless now. So, but however you're going to want to do it, if you're going to want to make sure everything fits exactly to where it was with your entire setup, fenders, bumper, everything, you're gonna have to measure all of that stuff. So what I will say before I get into showing off the kit and how we welded everything up, because I'm gonna end up having to, flip the mic around and get it to the rear facing camera. I will say, if you want to have everything fit and look stock, you need to, whenever you get your car sitting on the ground and you know that it's, or even if you wanted to lift it up on jack stands and get it level, take measurements before you cut everything off, from the ground to the bumper and the wheel to your fenders and everything. Get all the measurements down for your body panels before you start cutting stuff off. I will attach the Rock Solid Motorsports install guide in the description on this video. That way it'll just be a lot easier for you guys to follow at any point in time. You can reference that in this video and you guys will be able to see. They give you a full rundown on what you need to measure, how you need to do it. And it's just a basic, it's not going to be exactly perfect. They give you probably, I would say 85 to 90% of it to get it right. The other 10 to 15% is going to be, you are going to have to do your due diligence to make sure that you're measuring correctly and that you don't have a mishap like what we did. And I'll touch base on that. We ended up having to move the loop on the car because we didn't double check and make sure that the loop, which is this here, that goes up here, we did not make sure that loop was going to be in the proper place. We ended up actually having to cut it off, and I believe we moved it farther forward. We ended up having to move it forward instead of, we had it way too far back. Steven at Rock Solid Motorsports is the man. I reached out to him and we were in constant communication back and forth with what we had going on with the car. He sent me another loop because we just had to cut it off the car and then everything had to be re-welded and redone. He sent me just the loop and all the tabs and the support for the top of the front bumper, which is this here. He sent me everything, all the spare stuff that I would need. He sent me in order to make sure that it'd be right for our car, to make everything fit up under the fender, the factory fenders, and the factory bumper and all that stuff. So if you're going to do what we did, follow the directions. They're going to have you measure from your shock tower to the rear of the headlights. They're going to have you measure from, I believe they tell you to measure from your crank to where you have your radiator and stuff mounted. If they don't, because it's been a while since I put it on the car, highly recommend that you guys do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to touch base on what measurements you need to take and what it's going to take to install the two front end on the car and how exactly we have ours installed. So I'm going to go ahead and clip it now, flip the camera around, and then we'll get back on it. All right, guys, now I got the microphone and the camera and everything flipped around. I'll be able to walk you through exactly what all it took to put this kit on the car, and the little changes that we made and the things that we learned along the way. So it's not going to be the exact same for every single car. That's just the bottom line. Things are going to be in a different spot. You may measure differently. You may want something to be moved. They give you a little bit of leeway. You don't have to follow the directions that they give you to an absolute T. One thing I will tell you is there are different versions of this kit that you can buy. They have, I believe, you can get it with or without the headlight brackets. That might be a little bit different for the Trans Am and the Camaro. I can't really speak on the Camaro, but what I do know is with the Trans Am, it's going to be, which is what this is, it's going to be more complicated because of your pop-up headlights, if you intend to keep those from the factory, which we did at first. And now we have these, which this one's nice and crooked somehow. So we use these now. So these LED, this is what we use for our headlights on the car. That one's crooked too. Sweet. So it was a little bit more complicated to make sure that you get those brackets welded in for the motors and the headlights. Now on the Camaro, I know that it's going to be a lot easier because of, it's a fixed headlight. So it's going to be just a little bit different. There are different, versions of the kit that you can buy. The one that we bought, I believe, included everything. So we got everything that came with all the little tabs, headlight brackets, crossbar, all that stuff, loop, the supports and everything. So I believe that every kit will come with, which these are a different shape now. They come with your plates that you weld onto your fender support, which I believe I talked about on the intro video. We cut that outer skin or fender support, we cut off of the car. So this is actually, the way that this is normally shaped is it kind of comes down to a point, and it's kind of shaped like a almost like a, probably, I don't say a little bit sharper than a 45-degree angle, but it's kind of like the way that they angle it is exactly to fit into the opening of your fender support. So ours is a little bit of a different shape because I cut it and everything, and we ended up, because we cut the outer support off, which, by the way, the fenders and everything will go back on exactly like normal. This really won't change anything. We did it for weight reduction. So what we ended up doing is we did the support here, and we just, welded it so that way that this bar would have the proper amount of support and rigidity that it would need. This bar on our car, the upper bar, actually does not, there's really no weight on this bar. This is really more for like structural integrity, in the event of like a front end collision or something like that. We have that secured to the car, but there's really the only thing that top bar was holding was the headlights, and that's about it. I mean, even your bumper support here comes off of the loop, which is welded to your lower support. So this is going to be a little bit different, but it like I said, it does come with the your plates here, and these bars are already pre-bent and fixed for where they need to go and weld on to your lower bar here. So one thing I will say is don't weld anything into place. You would tack everything. So you would just tack your corners. Same thing with your frame rail. And in the install guide, it shows you exactly where you cut and where you measure and everything. And you cut your shock tower. So it has like an A, B, C, and it tells you exactly what line to cut, which we cut ours off here. This side is still the same as what they tell you to cut it in the instructions. And the reason that I haven't made it the same is I actually mount my catch can and everything off of this here, and my vacuum block. So I'll probably leave this. And I also don't really want to get into cutting this tip off here because there's a pinch weld that runs along where your frame is. Now, if you have access to a welder, which I do not, then you could just do that real quick and just weld that seam up right there and it wouldn't be a problem. But in the instructions, it tells you exactly, and you just mimic from left to right, right to left, whatever, exactly that line, and it tells you where to measure and where to cut that at. So these plates weld on, this one obviously to your fender support, this one to your frame rail, and from there you would tack each one into position, and it will, that way you can have a little bit of movement, or if you need to just cut that tack, which, if you weld, you already know all these things, but I'm speaking like you've never done this before. So this upper bar, wherever it lands on this lower frame support here, you can go ahead and tack that into place and tack your bars onto your plates, which I can't 100% remember. They may come together. The backing plate and the bar may be already welded together. I'm not 100% sure now. It's been a little while. So regardless, you would want to tack your plate and stuff at the corner so you can move that as you go. They give you a measurement of how far between each bar. You definitely want to make sure that you have a level on these things. So anytime you're welding, like when you're welding to the frame and you're welding to your fender, you want to make sure that is completely level. You're going to have to use an angle finder or whatever and make sure that it's plumb and that it's square. Because if not, whenever you go to bolt and something else we'll touch on is, whenever you go to make sure that you're fitting your fenders and your bumper or whatever you're going to do, tighten everything down. Don't put it on loose. And because what ends up happening is, the lesson we learned with this car is, whenever you go to put the fenders and the bumper and everything on in the hood, if you just kind of have everything loose and you go to weld everything to hold all that stuff in place, whenever you actually, if it's loose and then you go to tighten it, that's going to, any gap that you had between your headlights and your hood and then in your bumper and everything is going to open way up once those body panels are actually secured. So whenever you go to fit everything, make sure that you're tightening everything down exactly as it would be if you were to take the car out racing or driving or whatever. You would want everything to be tight. So that's one of the lessons we learned on this deal was we put it up on the car and didn't snug everything. So when we were actually done, I had a super fun time trying to get the headlights on each side, the spacing to be right with the hood and the bumper, which now of course doesn't matter. But so our upper bar and everything, wherever it lands on your lower support, can be tacked in place. They tell you, and this is what's going to be different. So where you want your cross support, your your bar that runs between your two lower frame rail bars, this can be, they give you an exact measurement. Obviously, this is going to differ. This is going to be different because we have, our radiator and everything, which you can see down here. All this doesn't come with the kit. I mean, this is all, and that's like we have a carbon fiber overlay on that. One of my buddies asked me if that was rebar, and I was like, no. So it's round pipe, and we put a carbon fiber overlay on it. So this does not come with the kit. This flat metal here that we use to hold our radiator in place doesn't come with the kit, and neither do these supports down here. So, what we did in order to make sure that everything was going to fit how we wanted it to fit was, luckily the hot side and the cold side and everything didn't really. We had a kit on this car where it was rigid enough where we could have the tube front end on the car, and we took measurements beforehand to know exactly where we wanted everything to go back on the tube front end, so that everything would be in the same spot as it was with all the factory, the factory clips and front end and all that stuff. If you're doing it, like I said earlier, you're going to have a lot more freedom if you're going to do it where you do the tube front end first and then you just make everything else fit around it. I mean, that's going to be easier ultimately, but it is, most of the time people have the turbo and it's already, they already have their kit and their turbo and their hot side and everything. Usually this is like something that somebody does when they're like, all right, I want to go full race car. So they probably already have, or, a crazy nitrous setup or whatever. So, but looking back, probably the most efficient way would be able to do the tube front end first. And then that way there's not so much that you have to make sure fits other than your body panels. So what we did was, after we tacked everything and we ran our main bars, our upper bar and our lower frame rail bar here, we had to, this is in a different spot in order to be able to support and have room between our radiator and our intercooler, which sits in the very front. So our intercooler actually gets mounted off of this bar here that you can see. And then our radiator is mounted here. And then these are the lower supports for the intercooler. But this is for the radiator, that's for the intercooler. These supports down here. So you need to measure. I would highly recommend, you're going to need to use jack stands. So whenever you go to, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but whenever you go to cut everything off the car, measure as many things as you possibly can. Measure from your crank to your radiator, or, to if you have pusher or puller fans, measure to that. Measure off of your shock tower to your headlight bracket. I mean, you're going to need to have that. They tell you to do that in the instructional video. Measure from the ground to, where your corner, your fender, and where get a measurement from the ground to your bumper. So that way, how all that is going to fit, and you can use that as a reference to make sure that you get your bars here square. That way, everything is going to fit back how it was. Measure. I mean, the old saying, measure twice, cut once. Measure 18 times before you even think about cutting. So it's, like I said, what I'll end up doing now is I will show you guys what it looked like when I first had the car, when we had the Huron kit on it, Huron Speed kit. I will show you what it looked like with that before we cut the tube front end off, or before we cut the front end off, and then the process of attaching the tube front end onto the car. So I'll go ahead and attach that in this video now. So now you guys can see what exactly we did kind of step by step. And it's not, I should have taken more photos than what I did, but it kind of gives you a basic rundown of what we did first and how we tacked everything into place, made sure it was all square, and made sure that we would have, our fenders would fit, our the bumper would fit, everything would go back into place. I mean, this whole thing, like I said, all this fits under your factory stuff. There was a picture that was in there that it had the factory hood and everything put back on the car right after the two front end was done, and you literally can't even tell. Obviously, the setup has changed since then, but what we did was because we had the two front end for, everything was for that Huron Speed kit. The new kit, the one-off kit that I got fabbed up, we just used all the same measurements and just changed the piping and worked the piping around the two front end, which is obviously, what you can do. That's kind of like if you did the two front end first. So what I will say is, the main reason that we did this on this car, and this video is ended up being extremely long. So the main reason that we did this on the car was for the room. I mean, the amount of room that you have, I can tell you right now, after having this car and doing everything that I did from bone stock, this car was a running, driving LS1 T56 car when I bought it. And there is absolutely nothing on this car that is factory anymore other than the freaking, steering, knuckles, and still has the factory steering rack on it that I just looped and made a little AN kit and got the right fittings and everything to just loop that. Honestly, I think that is about the only stock thing on this car other than the body panels. But the amount, so we did weigh the front of the car, and this is all chrome ollie tubing. We took off about 40 pounds is what it ended up being off the front of the car, which is a huge difference, especially for no prep. But the room that you gain is ridiculous. I mean, even when I have the motor in the car and the intake and everything on, and I don't have my radiators and stuff in the way, I can, honestly, even with the radiator in the car, I can literally stand in my engine bay in order to gain access to get to everything I need to get to. This was probably one of the best purchases I made for this car. That and the cowl delete. Getting rid of that cowl, like absolute money. I mean, that's kind of, you can do the step before that is cutting the actual overhang off, like cutting it all the way back to the factory glass is the step before this. Trimming that probably 3 to 4 inch overhang that hung over. I think that cowl hung over almost probably about the middle of the motor. But I mean, that's like, you got a foot of extra space back to that firewall. I mean, we kind of did it. The first thing we did was we, took cut that 3 to 4 inches off and removed the windshield wipers and the motors and everything, got all that out. And we still had, until recently, the factory front glass in the car. And I think that factory glass came out to about here, I believe, probably. And we just recently boxed in the firewall, and that turned out, like I said, I think I touched on that before. My fab guy did a gangster job doing that, as always. So, the cowl delete and everything, probably the second best mod for these cars. I mean, the whole nightmare of like not having enough space and spark plugs and blah, 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 like that's completely gone now. There's so much room. I mean, in my opinion, the biggest benefit of doing this is the space that you gain having this two front end kit on your car. And I can tell you right now, Steven at Rocksolid Motorsports has some of the best customer service that I think I've ever dealt with, especially from, a large company. Like I said before, we made a mistake on this car and had the loop and the cross support in a different spot. because we actually, we followed the directions to a T and not really thought about like, oh, hey, we should probably double check and make sure that we'll be able to mount the radiator and intercooler and everything and make it work. And we kind of ran into a hiccup, had to cut it off, let him know what was going on. And he like, I think it was like 2 days shipped, everything that I would need, because my car was out of town. I had a buddy of mine fab up this front end for me. And he welds for a living. So I had a buddy of mine do all that, and it turned out good, but there was a lot of things that I learned along the process, just as well as he did. And that is measure. But as far as the final product, I mean, this tube front end kit is, when they say that it's not going to interfere with factory panels and everything will, like everything that they assure you that it does, I promise you it does. The weight reduction, the room gained, the simplicity of it. I mean, it is not, I think my buddy did this over the course of probably, I think it was 2 or 3 days to get everything done and have everything fitted, like in and out the door. But after we got everything welded up and everything adjusted and tightened down and actually fitting properly, unless you want all this stuff to get surface rust on it and everything, which, I don't know why you would put something as nice as this on your car and then not coat it. But everything that we did, all the bare metal that was on this car, the cage, the tube front end and everything, chassis related that was bare metal, we did pour 15 on everything. So we do the brush on, which I might have. Let me see if I have some somewhere over here. Like I said, this video is getting ridiculously long, so we're getting ready to wrap up here soon. But I don't have that I can see, which I have it somewhere. But we use the bare metal, which is like the direct to metal, I think is what they call it, pour 15. And then everything was sprayed. You can get a spray can and do your top coat, which is the UV protectant. So that way, we race this car with no front end on it currently until we get, the 2-piece or 1-piece front end put on the car. We're going to leave it how it is. But, measure before you make any cuts, but go through. They are extremely thorough with their directions on the install. If you follow that, like I said, it's, they get you to about 80 to 90% of the way. And just make sure that you're taking as many measurements as you can from, things in your engine bay or the ground and everything. And along the way, you have the fenders and put the bumper on at some point to make sure that everything is going to fit back under, what you have is going to fit back on the car and be over top of this tube front end with no interference or anything like that. So, like I said, Steven is a gangster, awesome dude. And, we're going to be installing some more parts on this car that he just came out with, and I'm not going to reveal exactly what that is, but we're going to have a couple other videos and be able to show you guys the other mods that we're doing from Rock Solid Motorsports, probably Midwest Chassis. But, everything, like I said, I don't know if I touch base on this loop or not, but all of your really all the load bearing is going to be from this lower bar that goes onto your frame rail. We have everything mounted off of that. That's why that is the thickest and heaviest bar in the kit. All of your loop and everything you're going to hang is all going to hang off of this lower bar. So, just make sure that you're getting, all your measurements between the bars, that the measurement between the end of the bar there and the tip of the bar here is the same. So that way, everything's square. But just take your time doing it. The final, you're going to love the final product. So, I wanted to show you guys and do a little farther dive in on this tube front end kit, but amazing product. So, go to Rock Solid Motorsports and let Steven know that I sent you. So thank you guys. Until next time. See ya.